The macabre history of the DalesA wealthy man left 7 orphans with a locked box and no key. The autumn of 1993 found America grappling with the aftermath of the Cold War's end and the dawn of the Clinton era. But in the remote mountains of northern Vermont, the arrival of 7 orphan children at the Dale family compound would begin a mystery that would perplex authorities and haunt a community for over 2 decades. The children arrived on October 13th, 1993, delivered by a private car service that deposited them at the gates of the Dale estate with nothing but their belongings and a single locked metal box that would become the central obsession of their childhood. The driver, paid in cash and given no information beyond an address, left immediately without witnessing the children's reception or learning anything about the family that would become their guardians. Theodore and Evelyn Dale had lived in deliberate isolation for over 30 years, maintaining a sprawling estate that had been in the Dale family since the 1800s. The couple, both in their 60s, had no children of their own and had shown no previous interest in child welfare or adoption services. Their sudden acquisition of 7 orphans, ranging in age from 6 to 14, shocked the few neighbors who were aware of their reclusive existence. What made the situation even more unusual was the complete absence of official documentation for the placement. No adoption papers, no foster care agreements, no involvement from any state or federal child welfare agencies. The children simply appeared, as if they had materialized from nowhere, with only their mysterious locked box as evidence of their previous existence. The box itself became an immediate source of fascination and frustration for both the children and their new guardians. Made of heavy steel and approximately the size of a large briefcase, it bore no identifying marks, manufacturer stamps, or external hardware that might provide clues to its contents or origin. The lock was sophisticated and appeared to be of European manufacture, requiring a specific key that had not been provided with the children's delivery. Theodore Dale's attempts to open the box through conventional means proved futile. Local locksmiths, when consulted discreetly, declared the mechanism to be beyond their capabilities. The lock appeared to be custom-made and designed to resist tampering, drilling, or other forms of forced entry. More troubling, X-ray equipment brought to the estate revealed only vague shadows within the box, suggesting contents that were either shielded from imaging or too complex to interpret through radiographic analysis. The children themselves provided little assistance in solving the mystery. When questioned about the box, they displayed a uniform ignorance about its contents, origin, or significance. They knew only that it had been entrusted to their care by a man they described as Mr. Whitmore, a figure whose identity and relationship to them remained deliberately vague in their recollections. According to the children's fragmented accounts, Mr. Whitmore had been responsible for their care following the deaths of their various family members, but his role in their lives had been temporary and mysterious. He had provided for their needs, arranged their education, and eventually delivered them to the Dale estate with instructions that they were to be raised with care and attention, but that the box was never to be opened except under specific circumstances that he had not revealed. The children's backgrounds were as mysterious as their benefactor. They came from different families, different regions, and different circumstances, but all had been orphaned within a relatively short time period between 1991 and 1993. Some had lost parents in accidents, others to illness, and at least one to circumstances that remained deliberately obscured in their recollections. What united them was not their personal histories, but their shared experience of Mr. Whitmore's guardianship and their collective responsibility for the locked box. They had been taught to view the box as both a burden and a privilege, something that connected them to their mysterious benefactor, but also separated them from normal childhood experiences. Theodore and Evelyn Dale, despite their initial shock at the children's arrival, gradually adapted to their role as guardians with a dedication that surprised even themselves. The estate, which had been maintained primarily as a refuge from the outside world, was transformed to accommodate the educational, recreational, and emotional needs of 7 young people who had already experienced more trauma and uncertainty than most adults. But the presence of the locked box created an atmosphere of perpetual tension and mystery that pervaded every aspect of life on the Dale estate. The children were simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the object, viewing it as a connection to their past, but also as a reminder of secrets they were forbidden to explore. The box was placed in the estate's library, where it sat on a specially constructed pedestal like a museum artifact or religious relic. The children were allowed to examine it, touch it, and discuss it, but they were strictly forbidden from attempting to open it or damage it in any way. This prohibition had been emphasized so strongly during their time with Mr. Whitmore that none of them was willing to violate it, even as their curiosity intensified with each passing year. As the children settled into their new life, patterns emerged that suggested their placement with the Dales had been carefully planned rather than random. The estate's resources proved perfectly suited to providing the kind of education and care that the children required, and Theodore and Evelyn Dale possessed knowledge and skills that addressed the specific needs of their unusual charges. Theodore, it emerged, had been a research librarian and amateur historian before his retirement to the Vermont mountains. His extensive personal library and research capabilities proved invaluable in providing the children with advanced education that went far beyond what typical rural schools could offer. Evelyn, meanwhile, had trained as a nurse before her marriage and was able to provide medical care and emotional support that helped the children process their traumatic experiences. But perhaps most importantly, both Dales possessed the kind of patient, methodical personalities that allowed them to live with mystery and uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. They accepted the children's presence, the box's mystery, and their role as guardians without the kind of intrusive curiosity that might have disrupted the careful arrangements that Mr. Whitmore had established. Years passed with the locked box, serving as a constant reminder of unanswered questions and hidden truths. The children grew from traumatized orphans into capable young adults, receiving education and care that prepared them for independent life, while maintaining their collective responsibility for the mysterious object that had defined their childhood. But as the children matured, their relationship with the box evolved from simple curiosity to something approaching obsession. They developed elaborate theories about its contents, ranging from legal documents that would reveal their true identities to financial instruments that would provide for their futures. Some believed it contained information about Mr. Whitmore's identity and motivations, while others suspected it held secrets about their families, deaths that they might not want to discover. The box became a psychological focal point that both united and divided the children. They shared responsibility for its care, but they also competed for influence over decisions about its future. Some advocated for aggressive attempts to open it, while others insisted on maintaining the prohibition that Mr. Whitmore had established. Theodore and Evelyn Dale watched these dynamics with growing concern, recognizing that the box was becoming an obstacle to the children's emotional development, rather than simply a mystery to be preserved. But they also understood that their role as guardians required them to respect the instructions they had inherited along with the children, even when those instructions seemed to conflict with their charge's best interests. The first serious attempt to resolve the mystery came in 1999, when the oldest of the children turned 21 and declared his intention to hire professional services to open the box, regardless of any previous prohibitions. His argument was that they were now adults with the right to access whatever inheritance or information the box contained, and that Mr. Whitmore's restrictions had been appropriate for children, but were no longer binding on autonomous adults. This declaration precipitated the first serious crisis in the carefully maintained harmony of the Dale household. The other children were divided between supporting their eldest member's decision and maintaining the mysterious prohibition, that had shaped their entire childhood. Theodore and Evelyn found themselves caught between their role as guardians and their growing recognition that the children needed to resolve the mystery in order to move forward with their lives. The debate continued for months, with each child struggling to balance their curiosity about the box's contents against their loyalty to the instructions they had received from their mysterious benefactor. The psychological dynamics that had been manageable during their childhood became increasingly complex and divisive as they attempted to make adult decisions about their shared inheritance. But before any decision could be implemented, an unexpected development would transform their understanding of the box and its significance in ways that none of them could have anticipated. A visitor would arrive at the Dale estate with information that would both answer long-standing questions and create new mysteries that would prove even more disturbing than the original locked box had ever been. The children who had spent their formative years wondering what secrets lay hidden within their inherited burden were about to discover that some mysteries are locked away for reasons that have nothing to do with protecting treasures and everything to do with protecting the innocent from truths too dangerous to bear. The revelation that would finally unlock the mystery of the Dale children's inheritance came not through forced entry or professional locksmith services, but through the arrival of an unexpected visitor who possessed both the key to the box and knowledge of why it had been sealed for so many years. On March 15, 2001, exactly 7 years and 5 months after the children's arrival at the Dale estate, a man identifying himself as Thomas Whitmore appeared at the estate gates with documentation proving his relationship to the mysterious benefactor who had shaped the children's lives. He explained to Theodore and Evelyn Dale, the son of the man the children had known as Mr. Whitmore, and he had come to fulfill responsibilities that his father's death had transferred to him. Thomas Whitmore's appearance was both shocking and inevitable, arriving at a moment when the children had reached emotional and psychological maturity, but were still struggling with the fundamental questions about their identity and purpose that the locked box represented. His arrival would provide answers to many of their questions, but those answers would prove far more disturbing than any of them had imagined during their years of speculation and wonder. The elder Whitmore, Thomas explained, had been Dr. Jonathan Whitmore, a psychiatrist and researcher who had spent his career studying the long-term psychological effects of trauma on children. His work had been funded by a combination of government grants, private foundations, and his own substantial inheritance from a family fortune built on pharmaceutical investments during the early 20th century. Dr. Whitmore's research had focused specifically on developing therapeutic interventions for children who had experienced severe trauma, but his methods had gradually evolved beyond conventional psychiatric practice into something approaching systematic experimentation. He had become convinced that traditional approaches to treating traumatized children were inadequate and that more intensive interventions were necessary to prevent long-term psychological damage. The 7 children who had been placed with the Dale family were survivors of what Thomas Whitmore described as his father's therapeutic intervention program, a project that had operated between 1991 and 1993 before being terminated due to ethical concerns raised by oversight committees and professional review boards. The children had not simply lost their families to random accidents or illnesses, as they had been taught to believe. They had been specifically selected by Dr. Whitmore as subjects for experimental treatments designed to help them process and overcome traumatic experiences that would otherwise have caused permanent psychological damage. Dr. Whitmore had identified them as children who were at high risk for developing severe psychiatric disorders due to the trauma they had experienced, and he had intervened in their lives with the intention of providing therapeutic care that would prevent such outcomes. But his interventions had required removing the children from their existing environments and subjecting them to intensive treatment, protocols that violated conventional ethical standards for research involving minors. The locked box, Thomas Whitmore revealed, contained detailed documentation of the experimental treatments that each child had received, along with psychological assessments, medical records, and research data that had been collected throughout their time in Dr. Whitmore's care. The information was comprehensive and potentially valuable for understanding the children's psychological development, but it was also evidence of unauthorized human experimentation that could have serious legal and ethical implications. Dr. Whitmore had locked the documentation away not to hide evidence of wrongdoing, but to protect the children from knowledge that might undermine the psychological stability they had achieved through his interventions. He believed that learning the details of their treatment might cause them to question their memories, doubt their emotional responses, and potentially suffer psychological regression that would negate the benefits they had gained. The key that Thomas Whitmore produced was both literal and symbolic, a physical tool that could open the metal box, but also authorization to reveal information that his father had believed should remain sealed until the children were mature enough to process it without psychological harm. When the box was finally opened in the presence of all 7 children and their guardians, its contents proved to be both illuminating and deeply disturbing. The documentation revealed that each child had been subjected to sophisticated psychological conditioning designed to help them process traumatic memories while maintaining emotional stability and functional capabilities. Dr. Whitmore had used techniques that included controlled memory modification, pharmaceutical interventions, and behavioral conditioning that helped the children develop coping mechanisms for dealing with experiences that would otherwise have been psychologically devastating. The treatments had been successful in preventing the severe psychiatric disorders that conventional therapy had failed to address, but they had achieved this success through methods that fundamentally altered the children's understanding of their own experiences and identities. The children learned that many of their memories of their families and their time before joining the Dale household had been therapeutically modified to reduce their traumatic impact. Events that had been too psychologically damaging to process naturally had been recontextualized or partially suppressed to allow the children to develop normal emotional and social capabilities. Dr. Rachel Chun, a federal psychologist, brought in to analyze the documentation and assess its implications for the children's welfare, found evidence of psychological interventions that were both remarkably sophisticated and ethically problematic. The treatments had achieved their intended goals of preventing severe psychiatric disorders, but they had done so by systematically altering the children's natural psychological development in ways that raised fundamental questions about identity, memory, and the nature of therapeutic intervention. The children who learned the truth about their treatment faced a psychological crisis that was unprecedented in conventional therapeutic literature. They had to grapple with the knowledge that their memories, emotions, and personalities had been partially constructed through experimental interventions, rather than developing naturally through normal life experiences. Some of the children experienced what could only be described as identity crises, questioning whether their feelings, relationships, and sense of self were authentic or simply products of their therapeutic conditioning. Others found relief in finally understanding why their memories of their early lives seemed fragmented and emotionally distant. But perhaps most disturbing was the realization that Dr. Whitmore's interventions had been largely successful. The children had grown into psychologically healthy adults, despite experiencing trauma that would typically have caused severe and permanent psychiatric damage. They had developed normal emotional capabilities, formed healthy relationships, and achieved academic and personal success that exceeded what would have been expected given their early experiences. The ethical implications were staggering. Whitmore had violated numerous professional and legal standards in his treatment of the children, but he had also potentially saved them from lives of severe mental illness and dysfunction. The question of whether his interventions had been beneficial or harmful depended on philosophical assumptions about the nature of identity, memory, and psychological authenticity that had no clear answers. Federal authorities ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges against Dr. Whitmore's estate, recognizing that the children had suffered no obvious harm and had arguably benefited from interventions that, while unauthorized, had achieved therapeutic goals that conventional treatment had failed to accomplish. The children themselves were divided in their responses to learning the truth about their treatment. Some chose to undergo additional therapy designed to help them distinguish between their natural memories and the therapeutically modified ones, while others decided to accept their psychological development as it was and focus on their future, rather than attempting to reconstruct their past. Theodore and Evelyn Dale, who had unknowingly served as the final phase of Dr. Whitmore's therapeutic program, found themselves grappling with their role in an experimental intervention that they had never consented to participate in. They had provided the children with stability, care, and normalcy that had been essential for the success of their psychological development, but they had done so without understanding the true nature of their responsibilities. The Dale estate became a case study for federal authorities, developing new protocols for oversight of experimental psychological interventions involving children. The case demonstrated that conventional ethical frameworks were inadequate for addressing situations where unauthorized interventions achieved beneficial outcomes that might not have been possible through approved methods. But perhaps most importantly, the case raised fundamental questions about the nature of childhood, memory, and psychological development that continue to influence debates about therapeutic intervention and child welfare. The children who had grown up with the locked box discovered that the greatest mysteries were not about what had been hidden from them, but about the nature of their own minds and identities. The 7 individuals who had shared responsibility for guarding Dr. Whitmore's secrets ultimately became living evidence that human psychology was far more malleable and complex than most people understood. They were proof that traumatic experiences could be therapeutically modified without destroying essential human capabilities. But they were also reminders that such modifications raised profound questions about what it meant to be authentic human beings. Their story serves as a warning that the most sophisticated forms of intervention might not involve obvious manipulation or control, but rather therapeutic interventions that achieved beneficial outcomes through methods that challenged fundamental assumptions about identity, memory, and the development of human personality. The locked box that had defined their childhood ultimately contained not treasures or secrets, but documentation of their own psychological construction, evidence that they were simultaneously natural human beings and carefully crafted therapeutic outcomes, authentic individuals and products of experimental intervention. The Macabre History of the Dales revealed that the greatest mysteries might not involve external secrets, but internal questions about the nature of mind, memory, and identity that have no simple answers. The children who had spent their formative years wondering what lay hidden in their inheritance discovered that the most important secrets were the ones hidden within themselves, and that some forms of knowledge could be both liberating and devastating in ways that no amount of preparation could anticipate. Their story continues to influence research into trauma treatment and child psychology, serving as both an example of therapeutic possibility and a cautionary tale about the ethics of interventions that achieve beneficial outcomes through methods that society has not yet learned how to evaluate or regulate. Thank you for watching another tale unfold here on NW Storytime. Every story hides a secret, and tonight you uncovered another one. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep the secrets alive. Until next time, stay curious,